So the same thing always happens when a new device launches. The media gets review units ahead of the official launch, and we get to use them while we write our review. Then the press embargo lifts, every outlet posts their reviews and videos at the same time, writers and commenters go back and forth, and it's a huge frenzy of opinion and buzz for about a day, and then it all goes away. Sure, there's some follow-up coverage, but after that initial blast, almost no one revisits the device to see how well it's aged, because we're all on to the next big thing already.
So, let's do something about it. Let's take a look at a device several months after its release when it's not shiny and new anymore. I'm Taylor Martin with Pocketnow. This is the LG G2, and this is episode 31 of After the Buzz. This particular episode of After the Buzz posed an unprecedented challenge. Our own Michael Fisher reviewed the G2 back in September and gave it a 7.7 out of 10. The community, however, disagreed with the lower than usual score and posed some convincing counter-arguments for a higher one. Michael reevaluated his stance, decided the community had a point, and he changed that score to an 8.4. Shortly thereafter, Jaime also spent a couple weeks with the G2 and fell in love with the camera performance, battery life, and even the hardware. And my first experience with the G2 was sorely tainted by a defective unit that quite literally had a mind of its own. Now, I've been tasked with revisiting this controversial phone several months later and assessing the situation after LG has had time to collect itself. Here goes. Obviously, the hardware hasn't physically changed, so that's the perfect place to start. At the time of its launch, the G2 specifications were essentially the best combination of internals money could buy, and honestly, they still stand tall today, only surpassed by a handful of premium smartphones. It's fitted with a Snapdragon 800 with a quad-core Crate 400 CPU clocked at 2.3 GHz. That's accompanied by 2 GB of RAM and either 16 or 32 GB of fixed storage. The fixed battery is rated at 3000 mAh, and the 13-megapixel image sensor comes with optical image stabilization. It also comes with the basic connectivity options: Wi-Fi AC, Bluetooth Low Energy, LTE, NFC, and USB on-the-go support. And the display. It's still just as gorgeous as it was 6 months ago. The True HD IPS Plus LCD bears a 1080p resolution and measures 5.2 inches corner to corner. That gives it an overall density of 424 ppi. It's crystal clear and the colors pop accordingly. Viewing angles are great, contrast and black levels are acceptable, and it's still among the very best smartphone displays around. More importantly than that, the 5.2-inch display is packed into a comparatively small frame. The bezels alongside the display measure 1/10 of an inch, and the top and bottom bezels are rather slim too. There's something to be said for the level of engineering that made this possible. To this day, the G2 still has the highest display to bezel ratio. 75.7% of the front is screen, and it certainly makes a notable difference on a device with such a large display. But that's only part of the hardware story. Flip the phone around and you'll see one of LG's newest defining features, the rear-facing standby switch and volume rocker. After multiple stints with this button configuration, it hasn't gotten any less awkward to use. Unfortunately, the knock-on feature hasn't gotten any more reliable either, only working about 75% of the time, meaning you'll find yourself angrily tapping a blank display or picking the phone up and fiddling around for the standby key just to check notifications or use the phone. The concept is neat, sure, and we get why it's useful in at least one use case, voice calls, but it hasn't provided any sort of unique advantage to justify their placement or to offset the aggravation. And we're still not sold on the slick plastic build. This would otherwise be an ultra-premium handset, but thanks to the Samsung-esque plastic housing, the phone feels less luxurious than it should. After just minutes of use, the phone begins to feel slimy and slippery due to the oils on your hand. It's a shame, since the front of the device is such a pleasure to look at, but if you didn't have a problem with slick plastics before, you won't now either. In short, LG did a great job of future-proofing its smartphone, and in many ways the hardware still surprisingly competes with even today's flagships. The software situation was easily the worst part of the G2 out of the gate. LG fumbled. Hard. LG shares some of the same principles as Samsung in the software front. Pack in every possible feature. The customization features stretch far and wide, from the quick settings layout in the notification shade, to the system fonts and even the navigation bar layout. Much of Michael's initial thoughts on the software hold true today. It's almost overwhelming, and many of the concepts don't hold water. Q-Slide apps aren't really all that useful, nor is the slide aside feature. But LG clearly listened to the initial complaints of reviewers and users. The layout issues of yore were snuffed out, as was the lag. Our T-Mobile test unit is currently running Android 4.4.2 Jelly Bean, just one minor point update behind the most recent version of Android 4.4.3. And since those issues have been resolved, the software, while it's still cluttered and overdeveloped, isn't horrible to use. In fact, we like some of the touches, like the customizable nav bar and the ability to tone down some of the animations. The Settings app, however, is still a disaster. Sometimes phones begin to slow down over time. We can't say for sure how the G2 performs through extended months of use, but we can confirm the phone is performing considerably better than before. That's likely due to the Jelly Bean update, optimizing and making full use of the monster SoC that is the Snapdragon 800. Almost every element of the software experience is buttery smooth now. We have, however, encountered some issues when activating the slide aside feature or when over-encumbering the system with a handful of tasks. But it manages to cut through the muck and pick back up rather quickly. Gaming is a particularly outstanding aspect of the G2. The beautiful display paired with a Snapdragon 800 is an amazing combination. However, the phone does tend to warm up disturbingly fast, sometimes while doing more basic things, like heavy tweeting or just browsing news feeds. And that brings us to battery life. The 3000 mAh battery has been, for the most part, great. Except those times when heat becomes an issue. You can jump into a game like Need for Speed Most Wanted at 70 or so %, and 10 to 15 minutes later you might be at 63%. Through normal usage, the battery is fine, lasting upwards of a full day. But if you push the phone too hard, you'll pay for it in stamina. Call quality and network speeds have still been mediocre. On T-Mobile's LTE network in the Charlotte metro area, we've been hitting speeds as low as 1.7 megabits per second down, consistently in places we're used to seeing double-digit megabit speeds. And that yawn-worthy call quality hasn't improved since the last time we checked it out. The optics, on the other hand, is still one of the standout features of the G2. The 13 megapixel optically stabilized camera is still one of the best Android shooters you can currently get your hands on. The colors are rich, the low-light performance is still not quite as good as Nokia's Lumia handsets, but better than practically all its Android counterparts, and the camera application comes packed to the brim with countless features. It isn't perfect, but if camera quality is of importance to you and you like Android, this will likely be among your top choices. So how has the G2 held up overall? In a sense, it's aged like a fine wine. It's gotten slightly better over time, which is rare these days. Its specifications and hardware are interestingly on par with even HTC's and Samsung's 2014 flagships. Even today, the G2 is a viable contender, but it does have its quirks, like the rear-mounted buttons and overheating issues. Chances are, if you've recently picked one up or are planning to in the near future, you'll be pleased with the device, so long as you're forgiving of busy software. Folks, if you enjoyed this video and the After the Buzz series, be sure to click the thumbs up button below and subscribe to the channel to see more videos like this one in the future. Be sure to follow us in all the usual places, Twitter, Facebook, and Google+ at Pocketnow. I'm Taylor Martin, you can find me on Twitter at CasperTech, and I will see you next time.